Alright, let's look at Prep Test 34 Game 1. This is also June 2001, the first game from June 2001. Okay, in this game is a little bit different than most linear games. The first thing you might notice is that there are 9 slots, whereas normally you're doing something like 6 or 7. And then relatedly, you would notice that there are 5 clerks that have to fill these 9 slots, which means that some of these clerks are going to have to go more than once. So right away, one of the main things you're going to have to think about in this game is how many times are each of these clerks going to go. Luckily, it's not that difficult, as you will see. But the key thing here is that this is a game where we are short of variables. Okay, so some of them are going to have to repeat. Now, like I said, we're gonna think about how they're gonna repeat in a second, and it's not gonna be that difficult for us to figure it out in this particular game. I've gone ahead and written up the rules, some of the analysis, and what you might do as a setup. So I'll take you through that. And the reason is because it would just be too cumbersome for me to draw it while I'm doing it, especially using the mouse and all that, and there would just be a lot of dead time with me drawing. Okay, so let's look at the rules. They say, we're stocking aisles in a supermarket, numbered 1 through 9, and there are these 5 clerks. And then at the end of the scenario, they say each aisle is stocked by exactly 1 clerk, and no clerk stocks more than 2 aisles. Okay, so each of these aisles is going to get exactly 1 clerk, which means we're going to need we're gonna need 9. We're gonna put 9 variables in. Okay, but we only have 5 clerks, so like I said before, some of the clerks are gonna have to repeat. The more important part of that rule is that no clerk stocks more than 2 aisles. If they didn't give us that rule, then it would be very difficult for us to figure out exactly what the distribution. And when I say distribution, in this case, I mean how many times each clerk is going to go. It would be very hard for us to figure that out, because we could make one of the clerks go 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, but they just cap it at 2. So that makes the arithmetic that we're going to have to do a lot easier. Let's see how it's going to work out, and as soon as we read the first rule, I think we'll have a good idea. The first rule says Olga stocks exactly 1 aisle. Okay, so Olga is going to go exactly once, and then nobody else is allowed to go more than twice. So after we take account that Olga is going to go once, we're left with 8 spaces and 4 variables, and each of those variables has a maximum of 2, which means that if you do I guess what would be division here. Okay, we have 8, we need to fill 8, we have 4 to fill them, so each of them is going to have to go twice. Now, if they were just to reiterate the point I made earlier, if they would have allowed one of the variables to go 4 times, then the arithmetic would not be that easy. But because there's a maximum of 2 per clerk, then if we need to fill 8 of them, then all 4 of the remaining ones after we stop thinking about Olga are going to have to go twice. So that's the first thing you really need to figure out in this game, that J is going to go twice, K is going to go twice, L is going to go twice, and M is going to go twice. And I'm kind of repeating it several times over because it is very essential, and you're not really going to be able to follow the rest of the analysis if you don't understand what I'm saying here and why I'm saying it. Alright, but I assume that you all are with me now. So and I most people are, I know. So let's see. The next rule says Kurt stocks aisle 2. So we just put Kirk in aisle 2. Now I drew up 3 templates, alright, but I'll just point out to you on the first one where I put in the basic rules. So kind of ignore the rest of this stuff for a second, and let's just see. I put Kurt in aisle 2. Okay, so that's fine. The next rule says Manny does not stock aisle 1. So I put a no-go for Manny under 1. Okay, to indicate that Manny can't go there. Fine. So far, so good. The next one says that Jill does not stock consecutive aisles. So that rule we had to put over here, and what we're saying is that we draw the thing where J is next to where the 2 J's are next to each other, and then we put a line through it to indicate that those 2 J's can actually not be next to each other. So we're going to have to space them out. Alright, we're used to dealing with that kind of rule, so hopefully that's nothing too complicated. And the next rule is a really big one. Luckily, it's not difficult either. It just says that Kurt stalks the only aisle between the two aisles Manny stalks. Okay, so Manny's going to stalk two aisles. We already knew that because of the distribution. But now they're telling us that there's exactly one space left open between the two aisles that Manny stalks. Okay, and that Kurt is the guy who's going to fill that space. So that's where we get this MKM block from. Okay, and so hopefully, the language of that rule does not confuse you. I don't think it confuses too many people, but it does sometimes get confusing for a few students here and there. And so, make sure that the language is, that you're good on the language there, because that kind of language comes up a lot. The next rule says exactly one of Larissa's aisles is an end aisle. So there's probably a few ways that you could draw this rule. I just chose to write it like this. That, if you're Larissa, then you're going to be in 1 or 9, but not both, because it has to be exactly one is an end aisle. Okay, so you have to be in one of the end aisles. The end aisles are 1 and 9, but you can't be in both of them. And then the last rule says, and this turns out to be a big rule when we combine it with the MKM block, the last rule says that Olga's aisle is numbered higher than either of Kurt's aisles. So than both of Kurt's aisles. So the first aisle that Kurt stalks and the second aisle that Kurt stalks are both going to be earlier in the 1 through 9 diagram than Olga's aisle, and then the rest of the rule says and lower than at least one of Larissa's. Alright, so here's where I started using subscript, because I think it's useful to say that, okay, well, we know Kurt's first aisle is going to come before Kurt's second aisle, and then we know that both of those aisles are going to come before O, and then we know that at least one of L's aisles is going to come after O. Okay, so if we think about it in terms of L1 and L2, if there were only one, and that's what they tell us, that we have to have at least one. Okay, so if there were only one of them after O, then it would be L2. So when they tell us that there's at least one, what we know for sure is that L2 is going to be after O, and we're still open to the possibility that actually both of the L's are after the O. Okay, so the L1, the first Larissa aisle, could also be after O, but I'm not going to guess at that. I'm only going to put down what I know for sure, which is that Larissa's second aisle is going to be after O. Okay, so and like I said, this MKM block, along with this somewhat deep sequencing information, is going to turn out to be very useful to us. Let me just first go through this analysis box, okay? And then this part down here is where we put the MKM block together with this sequencing rule, but for K1, K2, O, and L2. All right. The first thing in the analysis box just reviews what I said earlier, which is that as soon as they tell us that Olga is only going to go once, then we know we have 8 spaces left over, and we have 4 clerks to fill those 8 spaces. And then because the 4 clerks that are left over can go a maximum of twice, we're going to need all of them to go twice. We're going to need all of them to do their maximum work. Okay? That we talked about in depth earlier. So let's go on to this bottom part. So what I've done is taken this sequencing rule, the K1, K2, O, L2 rule, and combined it with this MKM block. Okay? And combined it with the fact that that M cannot go first. So we in order to come to this deduction, we do need to combine it with the fact that M cannot go first. All right. So M can't go first, and there's a K in 2. Okay. So actually, I should say that there's actually like 4 rules coming together here. Okay. We're combining the fact that M cannot go first with the fact that K has to go 2 in the second aisle, with the fact that the MKM block, and with this sequencing information here. So we're trying to put all that together to come up with as clean of a sequencing line as we can. And it actually turns out to be very helpful to us. So, because the first thing is K1 is going to be in the second spot. Why? How do we know that that's the first K? Because the second K is going to be between the 2 M's. All right? And the first M cannot be in the first spot. So we can't put like M1 in the first spot and then K1 in the second spot and then M2 in the third spot. We're not allowed to do that because M1 can't go in the first spot. So, and then the second spot is taken up by the K1. We know that already. Okay, so that means that this block, this MKM block, is going to have to go after the K1, after the second spot, right? And again, that's because M cannot be in the first spot. So we know that K1, which is in the the first K, which is in aisle 2, is going to come before this MKM block. Okay, and now we know that the K in the middle of this block is K2. Okay, that's the second K. So now we look back at this rule over here, and we're like, but O has to come after that second K. Okay, which means O has to come, the only O that we have is going to have to come after this big block. Okay, and then we know that the second L, at the very least, maybe both L's, but at the very least the second L is going to have to come after the O. So that's where we get this rule from. Okay, and then on the side what I've done is written here that there's still some people that are not represented in this sequencing rule. In particular, we have L1, J1, and J2 that still need to be shown. Okay, and what we know is that those two J's cannot be next to each other. But that's about it. That's pretty much all we know. Okay, so hopefully you're still with me now. And what I decided to do when in my actual setup, so this was the analysis. This is kind of where we figure out what's going on. We combine the rules. We make some deductions. But what I decided to do then was, because there's only 3 places in which this big MKM block could go, and because depending on the placement of that MKM block, I'm then able to think a little bit more clearly about the placement of the remaining variables, I decided to draw up the templates. Alright, some people would do this without drawing up the templates, but as long as you make these deductions, as long as you figure out, that everybody besides Olga is going to have to go twice, and that this we have this clean sequencing rule between 6 of the variables and these 3, L1, J1, and J2 left over, then you should be alright, whether or not you did the templates. But I decided to do the templates. Alright, so as you can imagine, the templates, well, I shouldn't say as you can imagine, I should say that it turns out that there are 3 places where this MKM block could go. Alright, we know that it has to come after this K, which is in aisle 2. So one way to think about it is we're just taking this MKM block, we're starting as far to the left as we can, and then slowly we're sliding it to the right. Okay, so we start off with the MKM block in 3, 4, 5, and then we make some deductions about O and L, and I'll let you think about that on your own and look at it on your own because I'm going to run out of time. I need to keep this under 15 minutes. But then we just slide the MKM block towards the right. Okay, so instead of putting it in 3, 4, 5, now we put it in 4, 5, and 6. Alright, and what we see here again is that the O at least, well, the only O and at least one of the L's is going to have to come after the MKM block. So in the second template, that means that they're going to have to be in spaces 7, 8, and 9. And again, not shown on the diagram on this template is one of the L's and 2 of the J's. Okay, and then the last place where the MKM block could go is in spots 5, 6, and 7. And the reason that we can't slide it any further to the right is because we need to put one of the only O and at least one of the L's after. Okay, so we can't put the block as far right as 8 because there would be no room for these 2 variables, the one O and the second L, to go after the block. Alright, so when we put MKM in 5, 6, 7, then the 8 has to be filled by O because the O has to be before that second L, and the second L is going to go in 9. Okay, and then in this template we're actually able to think a little more carefully about the remaining variables because remember we know well, so once we put MKM in 5, 6, 7 and we put the O and the L down in 8 and 9, we already had the K down in 2. So now we're left with 2 J's and an L. Okay, we knew that because this L is in 9 that the other L cannot be in 1, and the reason for that is because of this rule, that L is either in 1 or 9 but not both. So as soon as we put this L in 9, then in the first spot has to be a J because it can't be an L. Okay, and then what we're left with is the first L and the second J have to be in 3 and 4. We don't know the order. Okay, it could be L1 J2 or J2 L1. Alright, So hopefully you can look at this setup for a minute or two more, make sense of it. If you can follow these two big deductions, then you should be okay in this game. I'll do the questions in the next video. Okay.